The rain hammered the cracked asphalt of the desert highway like 1,000 accusatory fists, turning the world into a blurred watercolor of greys and shadows. In the dim glow of a flickering neon sign outside a rundown motel on the edge of nowhere, Emily Harper stood, trembling, her thin jacket soaked through, clutching a crumpled envelope that held her last shred of hope. She was 28, with eyes that had seen too much betrayal, and tonight those eyes were wide with terror. A black SUV idled across the lot, its tinted windows hiding the men inside, local enforcers tied to the corrupt sheriff's office, the kind who twisted the law into a noose for anyone who dared speak out. Emily's whistleblower report on their land grab scheme, meant to expose how they'd ruined families like hers, had just leaked. Now they were here to silence her, their threats echoing in her mind. Run, and we'll find you. Hide, and we'll bury you. She'd fled her small-town home hours ago, driving until the gas ran dry, but they were closing in. Panic clawed at her chest as she scanned the empty lot. No cars, no lights, just the relentless downpour. That's when she saw him, a lone figure emerging from the motel's shadows, striding through the rain like a ghost from a forgotten war. He was built like forged steel, broad shoulders cutting through the storm, his leather jacket scarred from battles long past. A jagged scar ran from his temple down his jaw, a souvenir from a roadside explosion in some distant desert conflict that had taken his squad and left him hollow. Ethan Black, they called him in the whispers of biker circles, leader of the Iron Vow crew, a man who'd sworn off the world after losing his brother to the same kind of institutional greed that chewed up lives and spat out bones. He paused under the awning, wiping rain from his face, his dark eyes locking onto her with an intensity that made her breath catch. But Emily didn't know that gaze. She saw only a stranger, a potential savior in a sea of despair. "Please!" she gasped, stumbling forward, her voice barely audible over the thunder. "You have to help me. They're coming for me. I reported them, the sheriff's men, and now they'll do anything to shut me up." Ethan's hand instinctively went to the chain around his neck, a dog tag etched with a promise he'd made to his dying brother. Protect the innocent, no matter the cost. He'd kept to the fringes for years, riding with his crew through dusty backroads, fixing what the law broke. But her plea hit like a spark to dry tinder. He didn't know her name, but something in her desperate eyes stirred a shadow he'd buried deep, an obsession born from a chance encounter years ago when he'd pulled her from a wrecked car on this very highway. She'd been 18 then, shaken but unbroken, thanking him with a smile that haunted his nights. He'd watched from afar ever since, a silent guardian in the dark, never revealing the fire she'd ignited in his scarred soul. Without a word, Ethan stepped closer, his boots splashing in puddles that reflected the motel's garish light. The SUV's engine revved, headlights piercing the rain like accusatory beams. "Get behind me," he growled, his voice low and gravelly, carrying the weight of commands issued in foxholes. Emily hesitated, then obeyed, her heart pounding as the doors of the SUV swung open. 3 men emerged, burly and rain-slicked, one flashing a badge that meant nothing out here. "This ain't your business, biker," the leader snarled, hand twitching toward his hip. "Walk away, or we'll make it yours." Ethan didn't flinch. He planted himself between them and her, rain streaming down his face, highlighting the scar that twisted his lip into a perpetual half-snarl. "She's under my protection now," he said. The words simple, but laced with the unyielding honor of a man who'd stared down worse than small-town thugs. The air thickened with tension, the storm's roar fading to a tense hush, broken only by the distant rumble of motorcycles. His crew, perhaps, sensing trouble through some unspoken bond. The leader laughed, a ugly bark, but Ethan's stare held him, promising consequences etched in blood and loyalty. They backed off, tires screeching into the night, leaving Emily gasping in the aftermath. Inside the motel's dim lobby, The air smelled of stale coffee and mildew, the fluorescent buzz overhead casting harsh shadows on the worn counter. Ethan leaned against it, watching as Emily collapsed into a chair, her hands shaking as she tore open the envelope. Legal papers spilled out, forms for a sham marriage, a desperate ploy her late father's old lawyer had suggested. In this corrupt county, a spouse could claim protections, shield her from the wolves circling her testimony. I need a husband, she whispered, cheeks flushing with embarrassment. Fake, just on paper, to keep them away until the trial. I'll pay you, whatever it takes. Ethan's pulse thundered, hidden beneath his calm exterior. Obsessed for years, he'd imagined scenarios like this, ways to bind her to him without the weight of his darkness. But this, it was fate's cruel twist, offering a promise he could finally voice. He met her eyes, the scar pulling tight as he nodded. No payment, but if we do this, it's real to them and to me. I'll ride with you through hell if that's what it takes. His words hung heavy, a vow unspoken, the first thread in a tapestry of redemption that would pull them both into the fire. Emily searched his face, seeing resolve where others saw ruin, and in that moment, under the motel's flickering light, she extended her hand. The deal was struck, but neither knew the obsession simmering beneath would unravel everything or forge a family from the ashes. As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the desert in hues of gold and crimson, Ethan fired up his Harley, the engine's growl a symphony of raw power. Emily climbed on behind him, her arms tentative around his waist, the warmth of her touch igniting memories he'd locked away. The road stretched endless before them, a ribbon of asphalt promising trials of loyalty and buried truths. In the rear view, the motel faded like a bad dream, but the real storm was just beginning, one of moral reckonings, where a fake vow might become the truest bond, and a scarred heart could find its redemption in protecting the one light he'd never let go. The wind whipped through their clothes as they rode, the scent of wet earth and freedom mingling with the faint trace of her perfume. Ethan felt the weight of her trust, a responsibility heavier than any battlefield scar. He'd failed too many in the past, his brother, his squad, but this promise, whispered in the rain, he would keep. Little did Emily know, as the miles blurred by, that his obsession wasn't born of the night. It was a flame kindled years ago, waiting for this moment to consume them both in its quiet, unrelenting heat. The sun climbed higher, turning the desert into a furnace of shimmering heat waves that danced off the blacktop like mirages of regret. Ethan's Harley thrummed beneath them, a steady pulse that vibrated through Emily's body, her arms wrapped tighter around his torso as the miles unspooled. The wind carried the sharp tang of sagebrush and sun-baked sand, whipping her hair into a wild halo that stung her eyes. She pressed her cheek against the leather of his jacket, feeling the ridges of old patches sewn there, emblems of the iron vow, a brotherhood forged in the fires of forgotten wars and unbreakable oaths. Exhaustion tugged at her, but sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. Every shadow on the horizon felt like the sheriff's men regrouping, their corrupt web tightening around her fragile escape. Ethan's mind raced faster than the engine, replaying the motel's desperate exchange like a looped reel in his head. Her hand in his, small and trembling, had sealed a pact he never thought possible. For years, he'd tracked her from afar, news clippings of her quiet life in that God-forsaken town, glimpses during his rides through the county, always just out of reach. The wreck that introduced them had been a fluke. Her family's old sedan, hydroplaning on black ice, him pulling over on instinct, prying the door open, while she coughed and blinked up at him with those wide, grateful eyes. "Thank you," she'd whispered then, and it had lodged in his chest like shrapnel. He'd told himself it was duty, the promise to his brother echoing in every good deed. But it was more, a quiet fixation, born of isolation and the ache of what he'd lost. Now, with her warmth against his back, that obsession stirred, a dangerous undercurrent threatening to pull them under. They veered off the highway onto a dusty side road, the kind that led to forgotten chapels and notaries who asked no questions. Ethan had called ahead to an old contact, a retired judge in a border town who owed the Iron Vow a favor from a night when they'd shielded his daughter from a barroom brawl gone wrong. The chapel loomed ahead, a weathered adobe structure with a steeple that leaned like a weary sentinel against the endless sky. Dust devils swirled around its base as Ethan killed the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the creak of cooling metal and Emily's shaky exhale. She slid off the bike, legs unsteady, and faced him under the archway's shadow, the air thick with the scent of blooming yucca and unspoken fears. "I don't even know your name," she said softly, her voice threading through the quiet like a fragile melody. Her eyes, rimmed with fatigue, searched his scarred face, tracing the line that twisted from temple to jaw, a map of pain she instinctively wanted to soothe. "Ethan Black," he replied, his tone steady as the vows he was about to fake. He stepped closer, the gravel crunching under his boots, and pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. Inside lay a simple silver band, etched with a vow in faint script, "Till the shadows lift." It was his mother's, passed down after his father's betrayal in some long-ago divorce that shattered their home. He'd carried it like a talisman, waiting for a redemption he never believed in. "This'll do for show, but remember what I said. It's real to me." Emily's fingers brushed his as she took the ring, a spark jumping between them that had nothing to do with static. She slipped it on, the metal cool against her skin, and nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. The judge, a wiry man with eyes like polished flint, waited inside, his robes hanging in the dim sanctuary, lit by sunlight slanting through cracked, stained glass. The ceremony was brief, words recited like echoes in an empty hall, promises of protection, fidelity, unity. No flowers, no witnesses beyond the creaking pews and the distant howl of wind. When the judge pronounced them bound, Emily's hand lingered in Ethan's, her pulse racing against his calluses. It was paper-thin, this shield, but in his grip it felt like iron. As they emerged into the blinding light, the rumble of engines shattered the peace, a convoy of 3 black trucks barreling down the road, dust plumes rising like war banners. The sheriff's enforcers, faster than Ethan anticipated, their faces grim behind windshields. Bullets weren't their first tool. Intimidation was, laced with the authority of badges bought with blood money. The lead truck skidded to a halt, blocking their path, and the driver, a stocky man with a mustache like tangled wire, stepped out smirking. "Heard you two tied the knot, Miss Harper. Cute. But marriage don't stop the law. Step aside, Black, or we'll add obstructing to her charges." Ethan's body tensed, a coiled spring ready to unleash. He positioned himself in front of Emily, his hand hovering near the holster hidden under his jacket, not for violence, but for the line he wouldn't cross without cause. The Iron Vow's code was clear. Defend with honor, not rage. "She's my wife now," he said, voice low thunder. "Touch her and you face more than me. My crew's already riding, 50 strong from here to the state line. You want a war over your boss's greed?" The man's smirk faltered, eyes flicking to the horizon, where faint dots of chrome glinted. Bikers answering an invisible call, brothers bound by oaths deeper than ink. Emily's heart hammered, her hand finding Ethan's back a silent anchor. The standoff stretched, the air humming with unspoken threats until the enforcer spat on the ground and climbed back in. Engines roared to life, trucks peeling away in a cloud of grit, leaving the taste of defeat on the wind. They mounted the Harley again, Emily's arms locking around him with newfound resolve. As they sped toward the next safe house, a remote cabin tucked in the canyons, conversation flowed in fits, words carried away by the rush. She spoke of her father's death, how the sheriff's land grab had left her family destitute, her whistle blowing a final act of justice for the voiceless. Ethan listened, sharing fragments of his own scars, the explosion that claimed his brother, the promise carved into his dog tag. "I swore to protect the broken," he admitted, the wind stealing the vulnerability from his tone. You remind me why." By midday, the cabin came into view, its timber walls blending with the rust-red cliffs, a sanctuary stocked by the vow for times like these. Smoke curled from the chimney. His second-in-command, a grizzled veteran named Marcus, had arrived first, rifle slung casually but eyes sharp. Inside, the air smelled of pine and fresh coffee, a brief respite. Emily sank onto a worn couch, the ring glinting on her finger, while Ethan paced, phone buzzing with updates from the crew. The fake marriage had bought time, but the corruption ran deep, whispers of tampered evidence, bribed witnesses. As shadows lengthened across the floorboards, Emily met his gaze across the room, a question in her eyes. Could this stranger's obsession become the loyalty she needed? Ethan turned away, staring out at the canyon's jagged maw, the weight of his secret pressing like the scar on his face. He'd protect her, fulfill the vow, but the fire inside burned hotter now, threatening to reveal the years of silent watching. Redemption wasn't just for her, it was his chance to claim a family from the ruins, one ride at a time. And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from, and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments they reach you. The canyon's jagged walls rose like silent guardians around the cabin, their rust-streaked faces etched by centuries of relentless wind and sun. Inside, the air hung heavy with the scent of aged timber and the faint, comforting bitterness of brewed coffee, steam rising in lazy curls from a chipped enamel pot on the wood stove. Emily sat on the edge of the sagging couch, her fingers tracing the silver band's etched words, "Till the shadows lift," as if the promise could anchor her against the tide of fear. The ring felt foreign, yet reassuring, a talisman against the chaos she'd fled. Marcus, Ethan's second-in-command, moved with the quiet efficiency of a man who'd patched more wounds than words, his broad frame filling the doorway as he handed her a steaming mug. His eyes, shadowed under a weathered brow, held no judgment, only the steady loyalty of the iron vow, a brotherhood that had pulled him from the brink of his own despair after a dishonorable discharge left him adrift. Ethan stood by the window, his silhouette framed against the dying light, arms crossed over his chest like a barrier against the encroaching dusk. The scar on his face caught the golden slant of the sun, pulling his expression into something fierce and unreadable. He'd been silent since they arrived, his mind a storm of calculations, routes to the state line, signals to the crew scattered across the back roads, and the deeper turmoil of his hidden vigil over Emily. Years of stolen glances through diner windows during his rides, faded photos in local papers, had woven her into the fabric of his solitude. It wasn't possession, he told himself. It was the echo of his brother's last words, a vow to shield the fragile from the world's grind. But as she sipped her coffee, her posture softening in the cabin's warmth, the line blurred. She was no longer a distant light. She was here, bound to him by ink and intent, and the obsession clawed at his restraint like thorns on a rose stem. Marcus broke the quiet, his voice a low rumble like gravel under tires. Crews mobilizing, 20 already en route from the East Pass, another 30 holding the ridge. They'll form a perimeter by nightfall. No one's getting through without a fight. He glanced at Ethan, a nod passing between them. Forged in the heat of shared battles, the Iron Vow wasn't just riders. They were a family chosen in the crucible of loss, ex-soldiers and wanderers who'd found purpose in oaths that outlasted badges and borders. Emily watched them, the mug warming her palms, feeling the weight of that unspoken bond. In her world of fractured trusts, her father's empty promises, the town's hollow smiles. This felt like solid ground, even if it was built on a lie. She set the mug down, the ceramic clinking softly against the scarred table. "I never asked for this," she said, her voice threading through the room like a hesitant breeze. "The report. It was supposed to bring justice, expose how the sheriff's crew seized our land, left families like mine scraping by on nothing, but now it's turned me into a target." Her eyes met Ethan's, searching for cracks in his armor. "Why are you doing this? Really? A stranger doesn't risk everything for a fake wife." Ethan turned from the window, the floorboards creaking under his boots, each step deliberate as a heartbeat in the hush. He crossed to her, crouching to her level, his dark eyes level with hers, eyes that had memorized her face in dreams and dusty memories. The air between them thickened, carrying the faint musk of leather and the sharper edge of pine sap from the walls. "Not a stranger," he murmured, the words escaping before he could cage them. "I knew you before tonight. That wreck, years back on the highway, you were shaken, but you looked at me like I was the answer, not the storm. Said thank you like it meant something real." His hand hovered near hers, not touching, but close enough to feel the heat. The confession hung there, partial and raw, a crack in the wall he'd built around his scars. He'd watched her life unfold from afar, intervening in shadows, tipping off a mechanic when her car faltered, ensuring a job lead reached her ears, always silent, always distant. Now, with the ring on her finger, the distance shattered. Emily's breath caught, a flicker of recognition dawning in her gaze. You've been there? All this time?" Surprise softened into something warmer, a tentative trust blooming amid the fear. She reached out, her fingers brushing his scarred jaw, the touch light as a whisper. The skin there was rough, a testament to fires survived, and in that contact she saw not ruin, but resilience, the kind her father had embodied before the greed swallowed him whole. "I thought I was alone in this fight, but if you've been protecting me—" The moment fractured as Marcus's radio crackled to life, static slicing the air like a warning shot. "Boss, we've got movement. 2 unmarked vans heading your way from the South Fork. Sheriff's plates, but they're flying low. 5 minutes out." Ethan's face hardened, the vulnerability vanishing like mist under the sun. He stood, pulling Emily to her feet with a gentle but firm grip, her hand lingering in his. "Time to move. Cabin secure, but we don't wait for them to knock." They spilled out into the cooling evening, the canyon's shadows lengthening like fingers reaching for the fading light. Ethan's Harley waited, flanked by Marcus's rugged chopper, engines primed with a low growl that vibrated through the ground. Emily climbed on, her arms encircling Ethan's waist instinctively now, the press of her body against his, a silent vow of reliance. The air tasted of dust and impending rain, thunderheads gathering on the horizon like an omen. As they roared to life, tires kicking up red earth, the first van crested the ridge, a black beast cutting through the twilight, headlights blazing like predatory eyes. Ethan gunned the throttle, the bike surging forward in a blur of chrome and fury, Marcus falling in beside them in tight formation. The canyon narrowed, walls closing in like the jaws of fate, forcing the pursuers to weave dangerously close. Wind howled past, whipping Emily's hair and tearing at her resolve, but she held on, feeling the steady rhythm of Ethan's breathing beneath her palms. Bullets weren't flying yet. These men preferred the slow crush of authority, ramming fenders or blocking paths to force surrender. One van surged ahead, angling to cut them off at a blind curve, its grille gleaming menacingly in the last rays of sun. "Hold tight!" Ethan shouted over the roar, twisting the handlebar with precision born of chases deadlier than this. He leaned into the turn, the bike tilting at a heart-stopping angle, gravel spraying like sparks from a forge. Emily's scream caught in her throat as they threaded the needle, the van's bumper clipping the air, inches behind. Marcus veered wide, drawing fire. Not bullets, but the illusion of threat, his taillight a red beacon pulling the second van astray. The maneuver bought them space, the canyon opening to a wider trail that snaked toward the high plains. By the time they broke free, the vans were dots in the dust, outmaneuvered but not defeated. Ethan eased off the gas, guiding them to a hidden overlook where the crew waited. 20 riders strong, engines idling like a pack of wolves on the prowl. Their leather vests bore the vow's emblem, a chained iron heart unbroken. And in their faces, Emily saw the reflection of Ethan's honor, men who'd chosen loyalty over ease, redemption over revenge. He dismounted, helping her down, his hands steady on her waist as the adrenaline ebbed. "You're safe here," he said, his voice a low anchor in the gathering night. But as the stars pricked the velvet sky, Emily realized the protection came at a cost, his secret obsession weaving deeper into their bond. A thread that could either mend their wounds or unravel them in the pursuit of justice. The road ahead promised more shadows, but with the vow at their backs, the fake marriage felt less like a shield and more like the start of something unbreakable. Ethan watched her, the fire in his eyes no longer hidden, and for the first time she didn't pull away. The stars wheeled overhead like scattered diamonds on black velvet, their cold light filtering through the canyon's rim to cast elongated shadows across the overlook. The iron vow riders formed a loose circle around the cluster of Harleys and choppers, engines ticking as they cooled, the air thick with the acrid tang of exhaust and the earthy musk of sagebrush crushed under boots. Emily stood slightly apart, her arms wrapped around herself against the night's chill, the silver ring on her finger catching glints from a nearby lantern. The crew's faces were a gallery of weathered resolve, beards streaked with grey, tattoos peeking from rolled sleeves, eyes that had stared down deserts and betrayals alike. They nodded to her, not with pity, but with the quiet inclusion of someone who'd earned a place in their fold through sheer survival. Ethan moved among them, his voice a steady murmur as he issued orders, the scar on his jaw flexing with each word. "Flank the south trail at dawn. Keep eyes on the vans. No engagements unless they force it. We're buying time for her testimony to hit the right ears." Marcus clapped a hand on his shoulder, the gesture laden with the weight of years shared in foxholes and bar fights, a silent affirmation of the vow that bound them. Emily watched, feeling the pull of that brotherhood, a family forged not by blood, but by oaths whispered in the dead of night. It stirred something in her, a longing for the loyalty her own kin had squandered, her father's legacy tainted by the very greed that now hunted her. She stepped closer to Ethan as the group dispersed to check weapons and maps, the gravel crunching softly under her shoes. "They're all like you," she said, her voice low, threaded with awe and the lingering echo of his confession. "Carrying promises that don't break." Her hand found his arm, fingers curling into the worn leather, seeking the warmth that had anchored her through the chase. Up close in the lantern's glow, she saw the fine lines etched around his eyes, map marks of sleepless vigils, not just for her, but for the ghosts he rode with. Ethan turned, his gaze locking onto hers, the intensity softened by the vulnerability he'd let slip earlier. The wind tugged at his jacket, carrying the distant howl of coyotes, a reminder of the wild isolation that mirrored his inner world. "We choose our chains," he replied, his tone gravel-rough but honest. "Mine started with my brother. Swore I'd stand for those the system crushes. You. Pulling you from that wreck, it wasn't chance. It woke something. I've kept watch, not to own, but to honor what I saw in you then. Fire that doesn't quit." The admission hung between them, raw as an open wound, his obsession laid bare not as a shadow, but as a guardian's quiet flame. Emily's breath hitched, fear mingled with a strange pull, the fake vows of the chapel transforming into threads of real connection. Before she could respond, a low rumble echoed from the canyon floor, headlights slicing the darkness like knives, two more vehicles cresting the trail below. Not the vans from before, but sedans, sleek and official, bearing the sheriff's insignia that meant corruption wrapped in legality. The crew tensed, hands drifting to holsters. But Ethan raised a fist, signaling hold. "Let 'em come," he muttered. "Words first. We're not outlaws." Emily's pulse quickened, her body pressing instinctively against his side as the cars pulled up, doors opening to reveal 4 men in crisp uniforms, badges gleaming falsely under the stars. The leader, a tall figure with a face like carved stone and eyes cold as riverbed pebbles, stepped forward, flanked by deputies whose stances screamed bought loyalty. "Black," the sheriff drawled, his voice oily smooth, laced with the authority of a man who'd twisted justice into a personal fiefdom. "Heard about your little chapel stunt. Romantic, but irrelevant. Miss Harper's got warrants, obstruction, fleeing evidence. Hand her over, and we overlook this vigilante circus." He eyed the riders with disdain, but a flicker of unease crossed his features as the vow closed ranks, a wall of leather and iron resolve. Emily felt the sheriff's gaze slide to her, probing, dismissive, as if she were a pawn already captured. It ignited the spark of her own vow, the report burning in her hidden satchel, proof of land seizures that had orphaned families, including hers. Ethan stepped forward, positioning himself as a shield, his presence a low thunder. "She's my wife, legally bound under my protection. You want her. Go through the law proper, not this backroad ambush." The air crackled with tension, the scent of oiled guns mingling with the night's damp chill. One deputy shifted, hand on his belt, but Marcus's glare pinned him. The crew's silent unity, a force more potent than any firearm. Emily's voice cut through, steady despite the tremor in her chest. "It's over, Sheriff. The truth's out. Your grabs, the bribes, families destroyed for profit. I'm testifying with or without your threats." The sheriff's laugh was a bark, devoid of humor, but it rang hollow against the unyielding wall of the vow. He leaned in, voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You think a biker wedding stops me? I've buried bigger threats. Walk away, or your crew joins the list of accidents." Ethan's hand clenched at his side, the dog tag beneath his shirt pressing like a reminder of promises kept through restraint, not fury. This was the ethical precipice, the line where honor met the corrupt machine, demanding not violence, but the moral stand that exposed rot. "Try it," Ethan said evenly. "But know this, the vow rides for the broken. Your web unravels tonight." A standoff stretched, seconds ticking like heartbeats in the hush, broken only by the wind's sigh through the rocks. The sheriff's eyes narrowed, calculating the odds, the crew's numbers, the potential scandal of a public clash. Finally, he spat on the ground, the gesture a petty defeat. "This ain't done." The sedans reversed, taillights fading into the gloom, leaving echoes of tires on stone. The crew exhaled collectively, murmurs of approval rippling through them, but Ethan knew it was a reprieve, not victory. The corruption festered deeper, tendrils reaching to judges and media, demanding a bolder play. As the group settled into watches, Ethan led Emily to a sheltered nook by a boulder, the lantern's light pooling around them like a fragile halo. She leaned against him, exhaustion etching her features, but her eyes held a new fire, mirroring his own guarded hope. "You didn't have to tell me about the watching," she whispered, her head resting on his shoulder, the warmth of her breath stirring the fabric of his jacket. "But it changes nothing, makes it real." His arm encircled her tentatively, the contact a vow renewed in silence, the obsession evolving into something shared, loyalty born of scars, redemption in mutual guard. The night deepened, stars witnessing their quiet pact, but dawn would bring the true test. pushing toward the city where her testimony could shatter the sheriff's empire, with the vow as her unbreakable shield. In that moment, amid the canyon's ancient vigil, Emily felt the stirrings of a chosen family, one where promises outlasted peril, and a scarred heart could heal through the honor of protection. If this chapter's tension has you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button to show your support. We're riding this story together. The first hints of dawn bled across the canyon's rim, a thin line of rose and amber chasing away the night's velvet shroud. The air carried the crisp bite of dew-kissed sage and the faint metallic tang of cooling engines as the Ironvow riders stirred from their makeshift camp. Emily blinked awake in the nook by the boulder, her body stiff from the hard ground, Ethan's jacket draped over her like a shield against the chill. His arm had slipped away in the hours before, but the imprint of his warmth lingered, a quiet testament to the trust budding between them. She sat up, rubbing sleep from her eyes, and watched him across the overlook, crouched by a low fire, stirring embers with a stick, his scarred profile etched in flickering gold. The crew moved with purposeful silence, checking chains and packing saddlebags, their faces set in the grim resolve of men who knew dawn brought not relief, but the next leg of the fight. Ethan sensed her gaze and rose, crossing the dew-slick grass with boots that left faint impressions in the earth. He offered a hand, pulling her to her feet with effortless strength, his touch lingering a beat longer than necessary. "We ride for the city today," he said, voice low and steady, like the rumble of an idling motor. "Your contact at the federal office, old ally from my brother's unit. He'll hear the testimony, push it through channels the sheriff can't touch." Emily nodded, the weight of the satchel at her side, a bundle of documents, maps of seized lands, affidavits from displaced families, pressing like an unspoken oath. It was her father's legacy reclaimed, justice for the quiet ruin of homes turned to dust for profit. But as she met Ethan's eyes, shadowed by the brim of his cap, she saw the undercurrent of his secret, the years of watchful silence now weaving into their shared path, a protection that felt less like duty and more like destiny. The convoy formed under the paling sky, 25 riders now, engines coughing to life in a chorus that echoed off the canyon walls like a battle cry muffled by stone. Emily mounted behind Ethan, her arms encircling his waist with a familiarity that surprised her, the leather of his vest cool against her cheek. Marcus led the flank, his chopper cutting a wide arc, while scouts peeled off to shadow the trails. The road wound upward, asphalt giving way to graded dirt that kicked up red plumes, the wind whipping through with the sharp scent of juniper and distant rain. Hours blurred in the rhythm of the ride, the sun climbing to bake the earth into a shimmering haze, but tension coiled tighter with each mile. Whispers from the crew's radios painted a grim picture. Sheriff's roadblocks reported on the interstate, unmarked cars tailing supply runs, rumors of a dragnet closing in. Ethan's grip tightened on the handlebars, his mind replaying the night's confession, the way her touch on his scar had unlocked something raw, turning obsession into alliance. By midday, they crested a ridge overlooking the sprawl of the city, a concrete jungle ringed by haze, its towers glinting like false promises under the relentless sun. The federal building loomed in the distance, a squat fortress of glass and steel where truth could finally pierce the corruption. But as they descended, a blockade materialized on the approach road. 6 vehicles, a mix of squad cars and SUVs, lights flashing in staccato warning, officers deployed like pieces on a board. The sheriff himself stood at the center, arms crossed, his stone-carved face twisted into a mask of feigned authority. Flanking him were deputies with hands on holsters, their postures screaming the institutional rot Emily's report would expose. The convoy halted in a thunderous skid, dust settling like a veil over the standoff, engines idling with a predatory growl. Ethan dismounted first, helping Emily down, his body a barrier between her and the line of badges. The crew fanned out behind them, a wall of leather and chrome, vests emblazoned with the chained heart that symbolized their unbreakable bond. "End of the line, Black," the sheriff called, his voice amplified by a bullhorn, carrying the oily confidence of a man who'd bought his power. "Harper's under arrest. Falsified documents, conspiracy. Your marriage is a joke. Step aside or we add aiding to the charge." Emily's heart pounded, the satchel clutched to her chest, its contents a grenade of truth, ledgers of bribes, photos of bulldozed homes, testimonies from the voiceless. She stepped forward, voice steady despite the fear clawing her throat. "It's you who's falsifying. Sheriff, the land grabs, the family's shattered, it's all here. The feds will see it." The sheriff's eyes narrowed, a flicker of desperation cracking his facade as he glanced at the riders, their numbers a silent threat. He gestured to a deputy, who advanced with cuffs glinting in the sun, but Ethan moved like a shadow, intercepting with a raised hand. "Touch her, and you face more than cuffs," he said, tone even, but laced with the steel of vows forged in loss. The air thickened, heat waves distorting the scene into a fever dream, the scent of hot rubber and tension mingling with the dry whisper of wind through scrub. Marcus shifted beside him, radio crackling with updates, reinforcements from the vow en route, but minutes away. This was the moral crux. Not a shootout, but a stand where honor clashed with corruption, demanding restraint amid the urge to unleash. Emily felt the pull of Ethan's presence, his obsession no longer a shadow but a light guiding her resolve. "I've been alone too long," she whispered to him, just audible over the engines. "But with you, with all of you, it's different. This ends today." Her words ignited something in him, the dog tag warm against his skin, echoing his brother's plea. He nodded, eyes never leaving the sheriff, as a new rumble swelled from the horizon. More bikes, the full vow cresting the ridge like avenging spectres, chrome flashing in the sun. The deputies faltered, exchanging uneasy glances, the blockade's unity fracturing under the weight of true loyalty. The sheriff barked an order to hold, but his voice wavered, the bullhorn trembling in his grip. "You can't protect her forever," he snarled, stepping closer, face inches from Ethan's scarred one. "She's marked. Witnesses turn. Evidence vanishes." But Ethan saw the lie in his eyes, the fear of exposure that her testimony would unleash. "We don't need forever," Ethan replied, voice a low vow. "Just today, and the vow keeps its word." As the additional riders encircled the scene, forming an impenetrable ring, the sheriff signaled retreat, vehicles peeling away in a haze of dust and defeat. Cheers rose from the crew, muffled and triumphant, but Emily knew it was temporary. The corruption's roots ran deep, demanding one final push into the building. They rode the last stretch unhindered, the city swallowing them in its clamor of horns and exhaust. At the federal office's steps, Ethan dismounted, turning to her with a gaze that stripped away the years of distance. "Go in," he urged, hand on her shoulder, the touch electric. "I'll be right here with the crew. Your fight's ours now." Emily nodded, the satchel heavy with hope, and ascended the stairs, the doors closing behind her like the seal on a promise. Outside, Ethan watched. The obsession evolved into profound guardianship, his heart mending in the fire of shared redemption. But as shadows lengthened across the plaza, a lone figure slipped from a side alley, an informant perhaps, or a final enforcer, signaling that the true climax loomed, testing every oath in the unforgiving light of justice. The federal building's lobby echoed with the sterile hum of fluorescent lights and the muffled click of heels on polished marble, a world away from the canyon's raw embrace. Emily clutched the satchel to her chest as she approached the security desk, her pulse a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. The air smelled of institutional cleaner and stale paperwork, sharp and impersonal, a far cry from the wind-swept freedom of the ride. A stern-faced agent with a badge pinned like a medal of impartiality scanned her ID, his eyes flicking to the ring on her finger with mild curiosity. "Ms. Harper, they're expecting you. 3rd floor, conference room B." She nodded, throat tight, and stepped into the elevator, the doors whispering shut like a final barrier between her old life and the reckoning ahead. Upstairs, the room was a box of muted greys, a long oak table scarred by years of depositions, windows overlooking the city's sprawl where the sun now hung high, baking the streets into submission. 2 federal investigators waited, folders open before them, their faces etched with the weariness of cases that blurred the line between law and moral decay. Emily sat, the chair creaking under her, and spilled it all. The sheriff's land grabs disguised as eminent domain, families evicted under false pretenses, bribes funneled through shell companies that left her father's farm a ghost in the dust. She slid the documents across the table, yellowed maps marked with red X's, sworn statements from widows and orphans, ledgers that traced the corruption like veins of poison. Her voice cracked on the details of her own loss, the night her father collapsed under the weight of eviction notices, his heart giving out not from age, but from betrayal. "He promised we'd fight," she whispered, tears blurring the investigator's nods. "This is me keeping it." One agent, a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense bun, leaned forward, the scent of her coffee mingling with the room's tension. "This could topple the whole operation, but it's risky. Witnesses retract, evidence disappears." "You sure?" Emily's hand twisted the ring, its etched words a talisman. "Till the shadows lift." Ethan's face flashed in her mind, the scar, the steady gaze, the years of unseen protection that had bridged their worlds. "I'm sure. I've got people watching my back now. Real ones." The testimony stretched into hours, questions probing like scalpels, but with each answer, Emily felt the weight lift, the fake vow transforming into a pillar of truth. By the time she signed the final affidavit, the sun slanted low through the blinds, casting long shadows that danced like retreating ghosts. Outside, the plaza baked under the afternoon glare, heat waves shimmering off the parked Harleys like mirages of chrome fire. Ethan paced the steps, his boots scuffing the concrete, the crew dispersed in watchful clusters, some leaning on bikes, others scanning alleys, with eyes honed by too many ambushes. The air hung heavy with exhaust and the faint, acrid bite of city smog, a stark contrast to the canyon's purity. Marcus approached, wiping sweat from his brow, his voice a gravel whisper. "No sign of the sheriff's dogs yet, but that lone shadow from earlier could be scouting for a play." Ethan nodded, his hand absently touching the dog tag beneath his shirt, the metal warm from his skin. The obsession that had driven him for years now felt like a bridge, not a burden. Emily's trust earned through action, her touch on his scar a balm to old wounds. He'd failed his brother once, in the chaos of that desert blast, but here, in this urban crucible, redemption rode shotgun. The plaza's tension snapped like a taut wire when the lone figure emerged from the alley, a wiry man in a rumpled suit, face pale and eyes darting like a cornered animal. He clutched a briefcase, steps hurried toward the building's side entrance, but froze as the vow closed in, a subtle encirclement of leather and quiet menace. "Easy," Ethan murmured to his men, raising a hand. No guns drawn. This was honor's ground, not battles. The man spun, briefcase tumbling open to spill photos, grainy shots of Emily's home, her father's grave, even a blurred image of her on the Harley. "They paid me to plant these," he stammered, voice cracking over the distant honk of traffic. "Sheriff said it'd discredit her, make her look unstable, the marriage a scam." Ethan's jaw tightened, the scar pulling like a reminder of truths buried too long. This was the corruption's last gasp, a desperate smear to bury the testimony before it breathed. Marcus retrieved the photos, stuffing them into his vest, while Ethan stepped forward, his presence towering without threat. "Who sent you? And why talk now?" The man's shoulders slumped, the fight leaching out like air from a punctured tire. "I'm done. Lost my kid to their justice. Framed for nothing, locked away. Saw your crew ride in. Figured real protection looks like that." He nodded to the emblem on Ethan's chest, the chained heart a symbol of chosen bonds. In that moment, Ethan saw his own reflection, a man redeemed not by vengeance but by extending the vow. "Go," he said simply. "Tell your story to the feds inside. It'll count." The informant nodded, scrambling away, as sirens wailed faintly in the distance, perhaps the sheriff's final bluff, or the law finally turning on its rot. Emily emerged then, the doors swinging wide, her face flushed with a mix of exhaustion and quiet triumph. The investigators had promised swift action, raids by dusk, arrests cascading like dominoes. She spotted Ethan, crossing the plaza in strides that ate the distance, the satchel lighter now, unburdened. "It's done," she breathed, collapsing into his arms, the embrace fierce and unfeigned. The crew whooped softly, a ripple of approval, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the city in hues of fire and forgiveness. "They'll fall. The sheriff, all of them. For Dad. For everyone." Ethan's arms tightened around her, the scent of her hair, faint lavender amid the day's grit, grounding him. "For us," he murmured, the obsession fully alight now, transmuted into love's steady flame. No more shadows. The promise held. As the convoy reformed, engines growling to life in a symphony of unity, Emily climbed on behind him, her hands interlacing over his heart. The road called once more, not to flee, but to claim a future woven from scars and oaths. Marcus led the way, the vow stretching out like a living chain, unbreakable. In the rear view, the federal building shrank, a bastion of justice reclaimed, while ahead the highway unspooled toward horizons of hard-won peace. Ethan felt the dog tag shift. His brother's echo silenced at last. Redemption not in isolation, but in the family chosen, the vow fulfilled. Emily leaned closer, her whisper lost to the wind, but felt in her hold, a bond forged in fire, eternal as the ride. Thank you for riding this journey with us. Stories like these thrive on your support. If Ethan's redemption and Emily's courage moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We'll keep delivering tales of honor, loyalty, and the promises that endure. Until the next chapter in the shadows.